Good morning. This deep dive today is about our hip flexors. It's probably the one area of the body that I hear, probably the top 5 of the areas of the body that I hear a lot of complaints about. Like, why can't I release my hip flexors? And sometimes it's related to the psoas specifically. Other times it's related to the group of muscles that we refer to as the hip flexors. But ultimately, people, they tell me they want them to release, and why aren't they staying released? They do all these things for the hip flexors, and it just doesn't stick. And so I'm going to explore with you just a few little ideas today about why that might be the case. One of the reasons is because the hip flexors, you can kind of think about them more or less are in a vertical orientation. Yeah, there's some angularness to it, but generally they're in a vertical orientation, bringing this leg bone to the belly or our pelvis toward the leg. So that is their job. And oftentimes they kick in to do the job of other muscles in other planes, like the abductors or the adductors or rotators, for example. And so I won't get into all that detail at this moment, but just know that sometimes they will get involved, compensate for other areas that aren't involved. So when we can get those areas back online better, then things can begin to change. The other is that there's a strong correlation between your calf and your hip flexor. So when you can start to shift up what's going on down here, lots of times people discover some new yummy stuff up through here that they can begin to make a big shift. So what I'd like to begin with today is just starting with working around through this bottom part of your calf, and then we're going to go to the floor and explore some of our rotation. So what we've done is we're bringing the leg up and taking the ankle onto the knee. Now when you do that, just notice if you want to shift or shimmy your pelvis. You don't need to change it. It's more that I want you to notice it. I want you to notice if you can actually do the movement of the leg bone in the hip socket. And again, it's just a point of like data. Now what you're going to find here is you've got this little bony bit of your ankle, yeah? And I want you to follow up that bone and feel the edge of that bone all the way to your knee. You're going to take your thumbs and you're going to press into where that edge of that bone is. And you're just going to press gently, gently. Now, some of you will be surprised at how tight or limited this feels. The texture underneath your fingers and what that means in your brain might be surprising. Lots of times people are surprised by what the experience is underneath their fingers and how they interpret that, yeah? And so it's just notice what's there. Like I'll notice that as I get closer towards my ankle, there's a little less give, and there's a little bit more tenderness. Whereas up in here, there's a little bit more softness, and it's just got a different sensation. Now, granted, what I'm feeling in terms of tissue is changing, and that's a whole other conversation. More what I want you to notice is what you feel. Now, sometimes what I can also feel is when I'm pressing down closer, I notice something in my hip, yeah? And so that becomes curious when you start to notice. I've had clients who, they might be in and around this area, and they notice something in through their inner leg or inner thigh, or up further up into their hip flexor. So just notice, allow your brain to be expansive in terms of what you're noticing through your body as you're playing with this. Yeah? Okay, so that's one side. Now let's come up to the other side. Find where that little bone is here. Feel where the bone comes up, and then just press your thumbs into that area. You don't need to go hard. Like I actually like thinking about my hands as being an extension of my heart, right? And if you think about acupuncture meridians, they move from our heart and our lungs down towards our hands. So there is actually a connection. We don't have to totally imagine it. But it just becomes sort of fun to think about that the love in your heart is actually being placed on your limb. And I find so often, whether it's with myself or with my clientele, that the result that I'm pressing into or that I'm working with is just radically different, right? When I'm training teachers and I give them that instruction as the teacher, their response back from the person who's pretending to be the student is incredible. Right? I think one of the things that it does is it helps us get out of our thinking, kind of chewing about in our brain state and into a more embodied state, a more feeling state. Yeah? Okay, lovely. Good. Now, I'm just going to come back to this side And I'm going to do one little massage for the bottom of the feet. So again, we're going to use our thumbs. Now, of course, if your thumbs are a little bit sore, take the concept of what I'm doing here and play around with what works for your hands, yeah? Because on this feed, I've got people of all sorts of ages and all sorts of scenarios. So if you find that your hands are just not working well this morning, just find a way that it could work. Maybe you put your foot on a ball, or maybe you use more of your other fingers or more of the palm of your hand. Just kind of play around with what works for you, yeah? It's not the thing that I'm doing with my thumb that is what is going to help. It's more the concept of softening up your foot a little bit, yeah? Okay? Okay, good. And bring that down, and then other side. Now, sometimes people will feel like automatically there's something different. Not everybody. So if you're not the everybody, that's okay. Just notice the important part is noticing what you feel, yeah? All right, lovely. Okay, then bring that down. Okay, get a feel. Okay, now come up into standing for a moment and notice what your legs feel like now. And all we've worked with is the lower part. So that may have been an intervention that was very helpful for you. So notice for yourself what it was or what it wasn't. Yeah? Okay, great. So now we're going to come down onto the floor and we're going to do just butterflies. So if I angle myself a bit this way, we're going to do this movement that comes out like so. Okay, now this is a rotation motion, right? The leg bone is moving in rotation. Now I'm in hip flexion. I'm going to be on my back in a moment, by the way, but I'm in hip flexion. So my hip flexors were required to contract to bring my leg here. But now it's not like they're not being active in the way that they were to pull up. So what I'm saying is that as you come into this movement, your hip flexors don't need to actually be a part of the movement. So see if you could just take your hand to your front of your hip here, this crease, and see if as you move your legs wide, like so, into rotation, see if you can keep the front of your hip completely quiet. Okay, now if I angle this way, this is the way it will look. So my hands are in the crease. I can feel where those hip flexors are. If you need some help, just bring one leg up and then the other leg up. And then bring your legs wide and then up. Now, one thing I want you to notice, and I just picked up on it with myself, is sometimes what will happen is your heels will slide in like this, even minutely, because that's what I noticed for myself, is even minutely. So if you're moving your leg here at the hip socket, but your heels want to go in, that lets you know that you're not moving as well as you could. So it could be that the floor is slippery, so I'll bring myself onto my mat, right? And I'll just pay attention that I'm coming onto the outside edge of my foot, and the movement, the only thing doing the movement is through this hip. So the front of this hip ought not to be firing in this movement. Now, sometimes people are saying, man, this is really hard. So there's two things you can play with. And I want you to really check with your brain as I'm saying this. The first one is only move in the range where you don't have them fire. So maybe you have the range of motion to go full, but your hip flexors are just like, right? Like they're just completely on. The other is you can step it back a little bit, and you can just imagine your legs are like wooden telephone poles, and they're sinking into your pelvis, right? And just let the sinking happen, legs and pelvis. Now, I don't want you to try to make this happen. I don't want you to use your brain to like actively make this happen. You're using your brain for your imagination. So just imagine it happening. And then from there, now from that very, or that heavier place, then start to move. And can you feel it a little heavier as you do the movement? Now again, I really want to emphasize, some of you, because I know you, and you know that I know you, really would love to push. And you know you've got the range of motion, so you'll like push your pelvis to the ground, or you'll push your shoulders to the ground to try and make the hip flexors release. And just know that you're compensating. The range, you're increasing your range of motion is not what's going to help your hip flexors release.
Your moving well will. Yeah? So can you be in that range that you actually have the reality of the reality of the reality, right? And just work there. It will change, I promise you. Yeah? I'm happy to promise that. I've seen it consistently over almost more than 25 years. But you've got to watch what's going on in your head. Because in your head, you might be saying, oh my God, this is too small. This is not going to happen fast enough. I've got to push. Like, don't I have to push in order to progress? Don't I have to force in order to progress? Like, just watch the material in your head. Yeah? It's very valuable information. Okay, now what I'd like to do is one leg at a time. Now, this is a bit trickier. You're going to move one leg out and then back. Now, what makes this trickier is for this exercise, I want the pelvis to stay quiet. So you're probably going to notice at one point, the weight of your leg is it's going to get past a point of gravity. Your pelvis is going to want to come too. So this could just be a coordination issue. Place your hands on your pelvis, have your fingers at your hip flexors, and move that leg and just go only as far as the pelvis doesn't rock. You don't have to hold the opposite side down. Just notice, right? Because this, in part, has to do with how your abdomen is controlling your pelvis. Now, don't all of a sudden now go, okay, I better contract my pelvis or my abdomen to hold my pelvis. Just notice the response. Notice the response of the leg bone moving. Feel how the weight changes as you move through that line of gravity. Notice how there's more load through your abdomen. And does your abdomen respond or not? Because that is in part one of the contributing factors to your hip flexors, right? Now, I can't get into all those details in this short clip, but I just want to plant that little seed, yeah? So just notice, does your abdomen want to kick in or not? Yeah? Okay, now let's go to the other side. Just is very, very, very interesting, yeah? And it might take a little bit of time. Oftentimes I find it's not an abdominal weakness issue. It's not a core issue in the way that you might think. It's a coordination issue. It's because you haven't thought about doing it this way. And so your brain and your tissue is saying, what do you want me to do? And so it just is oftentimes I find, just a matter of practice of like, oh, you want me to do that, right? So just practice it. Give yourself some space to practice it and see what happens, okay? Okay. So now what we're going to do is this leg's going to come out, and now we're going to slide the leg along the floor, and then we're going to come back up again. So the leg's going to come out, no hip flexors. The leg's going to move along the floor, no hip flexors. The leg's going to rotate, no hip flexors. Now the leg comes back, hip flexors. So we're going to rotate, no hip flexors. We're going to extend, no hip flexors. And what I mean by that is the hip flexors aren't engaging. Now the hip flexors can engage. So soft, 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 yeah? And so you might find that your range of motion is here. Or maybe you're just working on straightening and coming back up. Or maybe you're working here. You decide where it makes the most sense for you to really explore this area and feel what happens. Okay, I'm going to flip around. We're going to do the other side now. All right, so from here, we're just going to do one leg at a time here. This leg is going to rotate out. Now watch, I didn't mention on the last side, watch what this leg does. Yeah? Because sometimes what will happen is as the weight comes this way, this leg will want to counter. That is an exercise. It's just not the exercise that I'm specifically teaching you. So see if you can do this one. Where the leg stays quiet. Watch that your foot's not pressing into the floor. And you find the range where your hip flexors are quiet. Good. And then from here, we're going to now do this. Leg's going to rotate out and then extend and then come back. Leg's going to rotate out, extend, and back. So as you're coming out, just notice what happens in your abdomen, your ribs, your pelvis, or this is your jaw, your head. And oftentimes, when people have neck issues, they start to recognize the relationship between their neck and the way their leg moves, or their jaw and the way their leg moves. And that can be a huge bounty. Because you might be somebody who's been working and working and working at your neck and your jaw, but not a lot of changes happen. And then you start to see, my goodness, there's an interesting relationship between my hip and my jaw. Yeah? And so now you've got something to work with, right? And if there's a message that I want to impart on this call specifically is that tissue can change. Tissue can change. It doesn't matter how old you are. Last week I was working with a woman who was 68 years old. Her tissue changed. I also worked with someone who was 75. Her tissue changed. I've worked with people with migraines. Their migraines, they can manage them. They no longer come like full force, right? Things can settle out. Things can change, yeah? I know we don't hear that a lot in the world, and you might think I'm a floozy for saying it, but it's true. 26 years doesn't lie to me, yeah? Okay, good. So now come here. Now we're back to this one. Let's come back to our butterfly. Legs are coming wide. Coming back. And so connect that. Now you might have a little more range. Okay, good. Roll on over now, and let's come up into a lunge. And what I want to play with this lunge is with this leg coming forward, we're going to first do one where we're just coming forward and then we're coming back. So there's a knee, a hip, and a knee. So let me say that one more time. Your hips are moving and your knees are moving. So pay attention to that. Sometimes what can happen when we are limited in through our hip in whatever way will drive the movement from our back. Now, the back leg only extends 3 to 11 degrees before the pelvis anteriorly tilts. That's important to remember. So there will be an anterior tilt. The distinction is, are you doing that as a result of your leg bone movement, or are you driving it because you don't have another way of moving? Like you're not aware of what you're doing? So just notice where that's happening. Because again, that might be related to a rib issue or a shoulder issue or a rotator cuff issue or a neck or a jaw issue, which all kind of comes tumbling back to perhaps what's going on through your hips. Yeah? Good. So pay attention to what's going on with your feet. Right? Are you gripping them? Good. Okay, good. And then let's come to the other side. Now with tomorrow's class on ease as a foundation of strength, we're going to get into this a little bit more, exploring these hip flexors, getting a bit more stability through the pelvis, which contributes to a better release through the hip flexors and a more sustainable release. So do come back if you want to explore it further, okay? And really just watch that breathing. Notice where you're driving from. And can you find a nice rhythm here? Okay, great. Now let's come up to standing. And now notice what it is that you feel between the center of your heels, the ball of your foot, base of pinky toe, through your legs. And now notice this platform of your pelvis and your legs. What do you now feel through here? What do you feel in terms of how you are standing? Do you feel longer? Do you feel taller? Right? Is there a greater amount of ease present? And how does this front of your hip feel now? Yeah? So a few little tidbits in there. Thinking about your calf area, thinking about your rotation of your movement of your leg bone without your hip flexor firing. Play around with some of those concepts. See what happens for you over the next bit of time. See if you can find a relationship there and what's contributing to why you are feeling what you're feeling. Now, if you want to dig into this more, you're kind of interested in your psoas muscle, we're going to plug a link in later today of finding that, finding our psoas online course. You can connect in there and dig in even more to the experience of your hip flexors. Alrighty? You have a great, great day. We will see you tomorrow for more of this yummy hip flexor stuff. Take good care.